Meeting is being
Uh,
participant. This meeting is
hold on.
being recorded. Zoom control left Windows key.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to tonight's reading. I'm very excited for this reading. We usually start with a poem. I've decided this evening I will read a poem from the collection that I'm currently reading. It is Collective Amnesia by Kuleka Putuma. It's really good. Um, so I'm going to read the poem Inheritance. I read this one last night and it struck me so much. Inheritance. I do not know you when you were drunk. You are a mess when you were drunk. You are quicksand when you were drunk. You become someone different when you were drunk. You become something different when you were drunk. Do you have to fight like that when you were drunk? You have a habit of turning on flammable things when you were drunk. Why do you want to burn yourself down when you were drunk? You are a hazard when you were drunk. You are exhaustion on the edge of a bridge, on the edge of a platform, in the middle of a highway. When you were drunk, your hands are gallows. When you were drunk, you cannot remember where home is. When you were drunk, you sleep in your vomit in other people's homes. When you were drunk, you turn other people's homes into asylums. When you were drunk, everything in your body turns into exile. When you are drunk, you are a photocopy of your father. When you are drunk, you always talk about how much you hate your father. When you are drunk, I have never met your father, but I know him when you are drunk. Yeah. So tonight, we are very privileged to be hosting Brian Walter. He has published 6 books with one on the way. When I saw that, I was like, wow. And he's also part of the Echo Poets and also from the Eastern Cape. I love the Eastern Cape. I was there recently, so now I'm like, oh, just love the Eastern Cape. So welcome, Brian, and welcome everyone. Brian, you can go ahead, blow us away.
Uh, Thanks so much. It's good to see everyone and to hear you again. In the Eastern Cape, I am in Quebec. I work with a group in Helenvale, and I kind of left them out of the poems about them out of this reading initially, but they've crept back in. I'd like to start reading a few poems from that, about that group, because they introduced some poems I was going to start with. But in order to explain the group, I'll just read 2 poems, very short poems by some of the kids who come to the poetry sessions that I have. I haven't been able to see them during the holiday because the gangster shooting has been so bad that we closed down for a little while. And they are nevertheless had been asked to write some poems for Mandela Day. I just thought I'd read 2 of those poems just to set the scene, really. But before I start, just 2 things. Am I audible to everyone, and is my screen share working properly?
Yes, it is, Brian, and we can hear you perfectly.
Excellent. Good. So the first poem is by a young girl. It's called Danger is All Around Us. Nowadays, our lives are in danger. We can't even walk around because we don't know when it's going to shoot. The parents don't want to send children to the shops. That's how scared they are. Gangsters shoot at each other. They don't care if they shoot the innocent because they are heartless. We don't even want to look at their eyes. That's how scared we are. The shooting becomes a daily thing for them. We can't say anything. we just see someone lying there dead, full of blood. And all we can do is cry and say goodbye. And so we pray. We remember Mandela and we pray for the future. Chesney Goodwin, who wrote that, is 12. And then her friend Tatum McCartney, 11. Knowledge is power. The gangsters do not care about people. They take small children to join their gangs without thinking twice about putting a child's life in danger. Children are scared to go to the corner of Querbus Road because they don't want to get shot. But we must remember Nelson Mandela. It is in our hands. That's the sort of world these kids grow up in the community I work with. It's a difficult place. And I'm going to read a few poems from Writing Room. One or two I think I've read on this platform before. If I have, I'm sorry, but this is from a very early session I had with the group, where a new guy came, and well, this poem will speak for itself. Writing Room and Writing Group. The new guy today has a problem. His son will mix cement at 11 o'clock and he's due back to work it. It's 5:02 now. Otis says he has to stay. We all dig in with schemes to put the dugger on hold, for he wants to be with us to write. He says, so let's get on. It'll be okay. Though in my mind, something concrete mixes into thought, some way of building into words, an urgency to get foundations right. And still with that same group, we worked in the Galvindale Community Center, and sometimes our group writing poetry, we're not alone. And this one is called Common. We are writing a first draft, bowed and busy. The other group across the hall prepares for a wedding. This is community space, and we say wedding, writing. They may be somewhat the same thing, after all. So the party puts the symbols up, hangs drapes of pale blue on the wall, and we write, one worried, with wet cement, waiting for him at home. Trowel and mortar, veil and gown, mix it up and get it down. So, as you can see, we have varied and often fun experiences in the writing. But the poems that I'm going to read now are a bit harsher because it picks up on that theme of the gangsters, and it involves a guy, and I know I've read poems about him before, Byron Ahmut, who was amongst us and who got shot and died. And this poem is about him. Urgent. Last week you cancelled poetry. The shooting was too intense. Another young boy killed in crossfire from the gangs, you say. Then describe the sounds of bullets, death whistling by, or out of power, fatting down. For now, we regroup again for words, discuss the nascent novel, wonder how to crack the poems within. But all the stuff you talk of, you should urgently write it down. Write it out, describe, reflect. Write around Helen Vale's small houses, throw plastered, semi-detached, an interior just above each step, where doorways each evening form brief domestic oil paintings. Outside in the streetlight glow, children get their last games pavemented in, till darkness comes and night walkers go where unwritten words can't begin. it was at that sort of point that Byron was shot, and we went to poetry and he wasn't there. This poem is called Keys. The Rasta comes walking down with the key that unlocks the poetry space, and we chat while he opens for me the gate. The security lock, the chain and keys click and clang, and we talk about the 2 shootings, a mutual friend, our poet prop, flesh cut and dazed in hospital, in his breathing pain, and then the young boy shot dead. The slugs hit him again and again, and as he called for his father and died. And in the center, the hard-hit girl, both her boyfriend and her brother, bullet cut or killed. Double trouble, the Rasta tunes. It's our community. It's in our hands. And I'm early. Normally it's just Byron and I at this time. I close my eyes for a moment to honor him, his community, before I turn to write. What else is there to do when poets are shot, our group hurt, when all healing and the walk to freedom is as slow as pain? When I wrote that poem, Byron was still in hospital, and then about 2 weeks later, we went to his funeral alone. When the mourners withdrew, the poets alone stand at the rocky mound open to the elements, earth and the wind gusting, and a friendly gravedigger. The pile stands proud, red-brown soil and rock. The wind whips the low heath felt above Helenvale. It heaves and blasts, and stole much of the song on this disjointed day, lashing clothing, unsettling hair, scrambling all our fashioned thoughts, blustering fragments of psyche and dreams, leaving bits torn and shrouds of memory. The poets stand together, arms on waist and shoulder. The low cross holds your name. Lost poet, we came to be with you as they set you down into the ground. One of the reasons I wanted to read those poems, even if I have read them before, is partly because it explains a little about some of the place I work in with this group of poets, and the place that little kids grow up in Helenvale. But it also serves as an introduction to this new set of poems I've just been working on. They were found in an old notebook, and I kind of reworked them recently. And straight after that funeral I described, like a day or two later, I was on an aeroplane and I flew to Australia to see my brother, and I was in a totally different world. And it was a very disjointing experience for me to go through all that crisis, hospital visits, the death of a friend, and then the burial, and then suddenly in another world. And I've called this poem Hard Pastoral. It's got a few pieces, and the first one is Australia. And parts of Australia are indeed hard pastoral. Australia, you were shot. I could not cancel the trip. I carried you out in the casket of memory, bringing a copy of Tennyson in memoriam, so I could hold you in words. But I couldn't find you there, though I read and read. The plane in the air. I left you buried, watched them fill your grave with sand and hard and silent rock. I brought one stone home, carried for you in my lively hand, now outside my study door. Then I left for the new old world, as lost as I have ever been. The outback sand is red and dry as bone. I watched a honey-eater fly down to sip and beak at a dripping tap, and I almost smiled at that. 2. So the last 3 months have passed, the death of a friend better than I. I traveled to the red center and back to family, circling. Then the fever of exhaustion. I wake to the world with fragile eyes. My mind, feeling, newly tries to touch any sense, but everything wobbles without frame or reference. Quite soon after I arrived in Australia, my older brother took me up, well, not only to the Red Centre in Alice Springs, but right up near Darwin to a nature reserve where the following poem is set. And it was just very freaky for me to wake up early in the morning and be out on this piece of water in this new place, and I was still not kind of left properly. I hadn't kind of left home yet. On the first morning on the water, the big saltwater crocodiles are hanging in their own reflection. Lily trotters trip unconcerned. A darter hangs his devil wings. Here is a new world that brings everything new, but old too. As old as the flock of magpie geese swinging down, waiting for the wet. Old new world, and I on the water of it. In no time this dry will break. You won't believe how the water will rise. The crocodiles will slip anywhere. And I looking with new eyes. 4. I went away and came back old and slowly dying. That's what a trip down under can do. The world is both the same and asunder, old and new. And you see yourself afresh with clear eyes, cold and unblinking, just above reflection. Unforgiving, I come back old, a stick insect, thought dry, slow step living. So those poems are probably not a very joyous introduction, for which I'm sorry. So I'll turn to a poem about ghastly fear. It's called Commitment. And I see on my page here, it says from the New Echo Book. It's not, that's not true. Commitment, it's got 2 parts, and the old one is set as the old Kucher Dam. It once had another name, the Paul Saar Dam, and we went there when it was being built. My father took us. Commitment. My father, drawn by all no entry signs, tracked down the silent construction site one day of a dam 3/4 finished. He looks up at the wall's immensity, spies a worker's ladder up the cliff face, and up he goes, hand over hand and foot by foot, 3 kids in tow, I middle placed, till I froze, fear stuck, young brother below. Up beyond with unhesitating limbs, my father and the other work away, moving up and going. I, caught in dread, steel myself to go on and not let go. Step by whimpering step, too limp to think of the climb down again. Fear in each cell. On the top, somewhat solid at the brink, we gaze deeply at the world far down there, mother and sister, diminished and small, our true life foreshadowed. Between yawning its downness, the concrete wall beckons. I carry that space now between my mind and edgy heart, the keen emptiness of the dam wall, a drawing impulse to fall. And somehow out of that poem, I don't know if it was my father's tenacity or mine trying to keep climbing and not let myself fall, I came up with these proverbs of tenacity. His imagined fall, a brief miracle. In the play, Gloucester's dizzying cliff, evoked in airy words, gapes downward still. All likelihood destroyed, against all odds, the barren stage always waits for Godot. A soft whimper in all fragments of sound, the wasteland ends. In the wilderness, Blake calls us to commit ourselves to the void. Now the next couple of poems are from the new Ecke book that our guys, our team, our poets are putting together. And I've written about this little incident before, but it fascinates me. So this is a new take on it called Angling. And it's about sorting out birds' nests of children's fishing line, but it's also about the lines of poetry, I guess. Angling. The nylon line in my hand is knotted, bird nested. I don't know which strand to start working. I've tested them randomly, simply working odd ones loose, unknowing, leaving limply hanging threads, each noose still lost, but lying less tight. In the background, the boys wait for their rods, eyes bright. They babble against the noise, the crashing waves. I work the twine to find some way in, then out, to find what will rhyme, pull a loop of truth from doubt. And then this, another odd poem. I don't know where my poems have been coming from recently. This one's also from the, or a proposed poem to go in the new Ecke book, which you're going to have to buy when we all try and flog it to you. It's got a sense of our life is a journey, and this train is bound for glory, as the old African American spiritual. The train, and it's a train you want to be on. There are no sinners on that train. It goes straight up to heaven. But me, I got the wrong train. So this is about me, I think, getting the wrong train. This train is bound for glory. And with a nod to Flo Wellington, hard training. It is so first world, this Gauteng train ride to the airport. Swiped cards and silent comfort, quickly down and through the old earth of Africa, the red earth and rock that deserves better than people sliding through it, underneath the roots even of wisdom's tree. And you get to the airport, as it is. The man in the airport queue, a face in the crowd, nothing like a petal fallen softly on a wet branch, says to his companion aloud that he does not trust people. Shuffling in the slow lines of my mind is the thought that I trust people to be who they are. I hear him, watch the clean confidence of his concrete face, and trust him complete stranger to be what he is. There's that, like I said, this poem is about life as a journey. And of course, the beautiful old medieval journey was taken in a ship of fools. There's a wonderful image of society. There's that hurry and wait stress of boarding, embarking on this airship of fools, the entitled, the frail, 12 businessmen agloat, first flyers and lost lovers, all settling into seats on this latest ancient boat. Averting bird strikes. Across the airfield, across this flat grassland of ancient African veldt, a small flock of birds spritzes up, then drops into the mown scrub. I've seen falconers fly birds to keep the airfield clear. Here, trained dogs do that duty, keeping the aircraft safe. Inside, passengers buckle up, avoiding each other's eyes. To ride an aircraft 8 miles high, reading the life of Edward Thomas, how he suffered being, when all I've read before were the Walker's poems, the foot on ground verse, thoughts treading from hip to eyes, suggestive words hanging softly in the country air, with the fragility of flowers, their stems too delicate to see. When we hit the air pocket, my panicked heart knows its death. The immense speed of the plane dropping, rattling and shaking to my core. The stewardess unflappable. As we shudder back into journey, I think of the death story of the poet Thomas, those dying days of the Great War. Some say his body was untouched, beautiful, his dead body memorializing the living, his portrait, his late. The shock of the explosion stopping only his pacing pulse of poetry. And that was the end. We didn't, on that particular trip, we didn't get up to where the train going to heaven was taking us. Recently, we lost a little dog, and this is an ode to Nemo. My kids thought we'd named him after a little fish. I'd named him after a character in Bleak House. Nemo. My friend, the poet, used to laugh. You dig a hole and people will come to stare into the earth, like folk gather for stories. We dig a bleak hole today to bury our little dog, limp and finally not skittish, at rest after 16 sweet years. This day, dogs deserve a soul. The other dogs smell around. We stand at the dark opening. She lies as if asleep. Soon the covering with the soil. We'll plant a strelitzia here. Some life, something for memory. Dear memory. A pup who would coil in a box lid 8 weeks from birth into a circle of salt. She'd sleep at my feet all day, dance at her bowl, run with the big dogs, stretch on the low bed I'd made. We gaze into the mouth of the earth. This poem I don't know, I'm going to try and read it. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but what I'm worried about is my timing. I see that it's after 8. I've got a few more poems to go. Should I just go on for a little while?
Yes, you can,
And then you
Brian.
can stop now.
Yeah.
I think you've got a mute button, so you can just mute me when I'm done. When you, thanks. I'll carry on for now. My son Michael is in media studies, and I helped him with a screenplay once. It was very interesting. And I've tried to write this poem as a type of screenplay using the language and the instructions. That screenplay writing is beautifully instructional. Poetry is not, but screenplay writing kind of tells you what you should be doing. Hence the verbs. Screenplay for Michael. The kudu group comes up from drinking, slowly across the clear and low lakeside where the water has dropped this drought. The bull leads. His turning horns catch the twilight, glinting in curves. His chest mane sways, reflecting bright. The low angle places the beast proud. Against the backdrop, the semi-desert shrub felt and distant shining sunset grass, the eternal grey-blue hills lost in deep transparency, establish his presence. Pan left to the family group, briefly hold the first view, her big-eared gentleness. Track out, showing as they come slowly, single file, the ewes, the young, bowed and revealed on the sunset plain. Zoom out to include again the male, track out further, slowly away, till the point of view is behind the scenes, behind a reed lattice, the full viewing slot now placing the viewer within the hide. Then track further back to show the team benched inside with binoculars, some with cameras murmuring, pointing. The kudu group set now small in the background, far beyond the proscenium cut of the hide slit, so that we can see nature play at being herself. I was thinking about not reading this one, but I will. This is a lockdown poem that came to mind recently when I've been working with a young poet in a mentorship program, and I've been talking to her, and between load shedding and data problems and Wi-Fi problems, it just reminded me so much of this poem when, well, it's called A Place for Poetry. That quietness that only teachers know, the hush that lulls a lecturer's self with a soft focused group talk and calculating murmurs, a muted eureka yelp and urgent whispering, has fallen still with the virus lockdown. Students have retreated. That technology, with a niftiness that defies distance, bridges into homes with work desks and data, where virtual possibilities dance and hold the apart together to keep the curriculum current. But there's an empathy that must set a person in another person's place, that must take a picture's heart into homes with no data, no electricity, rough walls, and shared rooms, to where family hope rests upon a student, brother, cousin brother, third-born son or only daughter, studying, reaching for something that's become vague and drifts away. imagination needs work to thicken quick and clever problem solving and deft technology into a more kindly blood. And the poetic eye to take a teacher to a student who pages uncertain notes, waiting for an SMS, where quietness has become doubt and distance has brought each of us home to distress. This poem is about watercolor painting, which is a fascinating sort of painting to me because it uses washes and suggestiveness rather than, exquisite tiny detail. And the poem's about that. It's about looking at an iris flower and then you see the painting, and the painting has to take place in your head. Watercolor. She plucks today a purple iris to focus on and paint. They grow quite wild outside. She examines the veins, the color purple, the heaven of detail, the delicate intricacies that are the organs of increase. The flowers hanging four leads up the haft over the soft beard and in. These details of delight she blurs over in a wash, creating a soft impression for the winged inner eye to land upon and to make a way home. I'm trying to balance, probably in a silly way, time against poems. So I'm just going to go on for a bit, if it's okay. This one is called Discomforted in Company. And the same friend who told me that when you open a hole, everyone comes and looks in it, told me that the word company comes from two old words, co and panis, with bread, those with whom you take or make bread, which is where companionship comes from. And I like that idea, although the word company has gone all over the place now into funny areas, but discomforted in company, it's a self-ironic poem, I think. It's when you kind of put your foot in it. You say things that you shouldn't be saying. And they are insensitive in terms of the whole thing of coloniality. It's just being stupid. And that's why discomforted in company. Warm bushu and then maize meal, pot baked or set upon the staff room table. She turns from Zulu, for my sake, samp and beans. The charm of rural places is our home-produced food. We also ground the flour for this bread on our grinding slab. She describes the stone's slight declivity from years of women's hands at work, milling maize with round handstones. I say, I'm looking for a slab like that, flat, but dipped curvature from years of grinding to set in my garden for water, for birds, but my interest miscarries. Our tools are not for gardens or birds. They still work. Those worn old stones are our machines. And then a poem also that implicitly is about the colonial situation and just it's called The Bar, partly because it was set in a bar, but also just it's a bar it's just a bar that that sort of holds you up, I suppose. The Bar. a post-second-hand bookshop beer. And there's nothing, if you're not a beer drinker, you won't know the joys of going to a bar after going to a second-hand bookshop and having a beer and unpacking your purchases. You know, that is a particular joy, which I try to evoke here. A post-second-hand bookshop beer on a hot Cape Town afternoon. And I've unearthed an old hardback, a volume of South African poetry. The old guy with his whiskey prods then says he didn't think there was any poetry in South Africa. Irish, as his brogue makes clear. But married a Burmese, he says, who's a short while dead. And he tears up. And in his cups he softly sings of Galway Bay, his frail eyes wet and blue as salt, his voice breaking as he chants of the language that the strangers do not know. I listen, a stranger to myself, to him, my own country, to the South African poetry bound tightly in hardcover in the English volume on the bar, while we try to break a silence that settled with the air is sung. While trying to hurry to the end, I'm going to quickly try and squeeze in this poem called Vulindlela, because I'm still trying to think about this poem. It needs something, I'm not sure what. But Vulindlela is the opening of the road. I suppose the preparing of the way, and that's what John the Baptist did. And the song's for my brother-in-law, John. And it has to do, once again, with the journey that is life and the going on that journey, and sometimes needing someone to, like John the Baptist, to prepare the way for you. So Vulindlela for John Donaldson. In the wilderness country around the Grondal Dam, they rested beneath the ancient boughs of wind-blown Outeniqua yellowwoods. Big with character and so smoke blue, the trees looked like cedars or old pines, and they thought of you. Their hearts hung on the branches as they listened to the stream, glimpsed the cycads up the cliff, safe from hands, and watched butterflies in the lazy wind. She pointed, how red that Tucumarea going to Kira on the hills. And he said, the plumbago casts a pale blue light. Let's walk back to the cool still of ideas. But she held, our path is through this hard bush that so resembles Addo, but also not, so similar yet unalike. It seems that way, he mused, for all who take this trail, the old familiar and the unearthing of a different self. Were John, our voorloper, only here to walk with us and prepare our way through this rough country, to lead us on to the pools, all should be as it should. And so they spoke and caught their breaths and leant their aging limbs and tired minds on the bowed and storm-bent yellowwood. And then the poem I've just been working on recently, it's called Once, and it's a love poem for my poor and long-suffering life partner and friend, Cheryl. It's about our home, and I find that many of my poems of love are autumnal, and I don't know why. Maybe it's, yeah. Once the gutters ran into mud at the path to our home, and so we dug a deep pond and fashioned a bridge to keep the way open and to help visitors to pause and to look and to see the fish turn amongst lily pads. If I have any meaning in mind at all these late times, It is to greet you at the bridge on the first of autumn days, with summer still lingering, my Psyche's wings almost still, and new leaves on the plantain green. Perhaps the washed moon in the day blue sky will remind us of time beyond our years, and of a beauty too distant for greed on the bridge we made into our home. Guys, thanks very much for being with me. It's very strange listening to no noise, but there we go. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Brian. Oh, it was amazing. Should we all unmute ourselves and give a little clap? Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Can we get rid of the screen?
Oh, yes.
Brilliant.
Okay, cool. So it's the part of the evening now where we have the Q&A. So if you guys have any questions for Brian about his work, and also just about him as a person, you guys can just go ahead and unmute yourselves and raise your hand and yeah, ask your question. I think if there's no questions yet, I'll actually kick us off. So Brian, I was really wondering about the work that you do with the kids. Obviously, they are writing about very intense experiences of their own and the trauma that they have gone through. I was interested to find out, how do you get them to actually feel comfortable enough and safe enough to write about these things?
I try not to make the writing sessions, although they call what I call a writing room, they call a classroom. And, you know, I try and relax them by the language and the process and making an unthreatening space. Although so many people do tend to push that sort of situation into classroom space, I try to make it unthreatening. And also, I've tried to teach them, it's an old practice, I used it in the MA in creative writing at Rhodes, it's that free writing stuff. But I really challenge them to write in a very short space of time. I might tell them a story or describe something or get them to describe something, and then I say, you've got 4 minutes, right? And the idea is to let their hands do the writing and not their minds, and then they free up a bit yeah, so I tried to get that writing, that first writing, to be quite instinctive and unself-conscious. I think in many classrooms, because I did work with teachers on writing in classrooms for some time, and I found that all the time, teachers worry about spelling and kids making mistakes. And I try and relieve them of that pressure, because all those well-meaning teachers block that which should be coming out. So I try and create my pressure is time. I say to them, you've got 4 minutes. And really the kids have learned, not only the kids, I work with older poets too, they've learned to take that time and just write. We don't judge them on it, and then we go into editing after that. So we've got those little techniques that we use, and I do try and focus on, I don't like to tell people what to write, but I might give them prompts so they reflect, so that we get their voices coming through. You know,
Yeah.
and that's about it. We do a certain amount of editing with them, but trying all the time to get the new writers to become their own editors, or to peer edit. So yeah, but it's very interesting, and I find if anyone's been in the group for as long as 5 years, they're really starting to learn those writing techniques.
Yeah.
As you can see, those kids whose poems I wrote tonight, they joined us either late last year or early this year. They're very young.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that's what I was curious about, really. I mean, at that age, to get children that age to open up like that and to write about it. I mean, the pieces are amazing. It's very impressive.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Brian.
Sure, thank
Jacques,
you.
Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, Charlotte.
Ah, now you can. Okay. You know, Brian, I love your work. I've never heard a reading of yours that I didn't love. And tonight's one was particularly moving. I love these poems. And if I have a question, it's that especially in those early poems, those poems that you read early on, you put poetry face to face, you put poetry in conversation with something that is so violent and so dire, you know, that kind of violence. And it, you know, it's an amazing thing because you open us up to the fear that poetry may not help very much in the face of that, and yet somehow it does. There's a kind of paradox, and that to me, that's the kind of hole that I feel, and I link it to that image of you climbing the rock face and feeling, you know, feeling that terror, but somehow holding on. I don't know if you want to say something about that, how it felt to write those poems. I haven't heard poems like that for a long time, maybe since the late 80s, when people had to you know, confront almost an embarrassment at writing when such terrible things were happening all around. I haven't heard poems like that for a long time. I don't know if you want to say something about that. They really move me.
Jacques, thanks a lot. And I'm touched that you say they moved you. I feel I don't live in Helenvale, and sometimes, but I go there often, at least weekly. And I've been doing so for 12 years, and I'm aware that I sometimes am stepping into other people's space, and I think that's something to be conscious of, and I worry about that quite a lot. So I try not to describe things for other people, but just to describe what I feel in that space that I work in, and where I've made friends and work with writers. One doesn't want to appropriate or speak for people. I think that's important to say. But, and it is a paradox for that reason for me. The other thing is that amongst the writing techniques I use is that I also want the people to see that I'm a writer too, and I write with them. That I write something clumsy and that I'll edit it and so on. So a number of the poems I work on come out of writing with, and sometimes when we put books together, as we do every year, I'll put one or two of my poems in that come from the writing experiences that we've had as a group. Sometimes I read with a group, but I really like to foreground their own voices, their own feelings, their own experiences, and all that. So I tag on sometimes, but with trying not to take away from the voices that they are using to speak to their experience. One of the things, though, on the other hand, sorry, that is one of the things that bothers me. On the other hand, a lot of the writers, especially the older ones, talk about the poetry group as a therapy, that they come into a space where they can be and relax and articulate. And I think that's quite an important thing for the group. And if the sessions are helping with that, I think that's important. We started a second group, not the Helenvale poets, but the Salt Lake poets, and they're late primary school children, grade 7 children. And it was remarkable how many of them found their poetry sessions to be a safe place, a place where they could examine their emotions, a place where they could say things where they were accepted. And that reflected a lot in their poems as well. So for me, it's been an honor and a privilege and a lot of hard work working in that space. Why I was hesitant to read poems about Helenvale tonight is because I don't want to flag that, but I kind of needed it to explain those Australian poems and where that came from. But yeah, all I can say, it's for me, it's a valuable project, that kind of hard. This week, this holiday, there was so much violence in the area this holiday that we were advised not to have sessions. And so I stay home. But the kids that are there walk up and down the streets where I don't go. You know what I mean? Their lives are lived in that space. And yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question, but certainly I've rambled a bit.
No, you have. Thank you. It's wonderful.
Thanks, Jacques.
Yeah.
Troyden, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for the reading, and yeah, well done. You've obviously got a very good command over many writing techniques, and I'm just sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm just wondering, are there any books on how to write that you would recommend to people who want to improve their skills?
The ones that I think helped me was I've got to get her name right. The Artist's Way. Is it Julia Cameron? I didn't finish that book. I didn't go through it all the way, but I found the first part of the book very interesting, because what as I understand it, she set out originally to unblock artists and visual artists and writers who had found themselves blocked. So it's hard to, and through that she speaks of doing the morning pages, a very practical advice to get yourself writing. And I used that a lot, not only to get myself writing and to create a writing discipline, but also I use that idea a lot, as you would have heard in the workshops I have with the kids, to get them down and get them writing before they think about anything, and to make that a kind of practice. So as I say, I didn't read all of the book, but I found the beginning bits and those exercises in the beginning extremely useful. My friend used to buy, Kachel Lagan, the poet, Charlie, used to buy many books on writing, and then he'd pass them on to me. And there's one that he gave me by a guy, and if I get his name right, is it Prendergast or something? It's called The War of Art, an inversion of the art. And I found also, I didn't read that whole book, nor would I suggest that the whole, but where I found it very useful is that he spoke about the need for fighting resistance. That is, whenever you wanted to sit down to write, you'd find something to do. And when you think about it, that's exactly what one does. There's always something, and you've got to steel yourself to fight that war of art and get whatever form of resistance out of the way. So those are two very practical books about the discipline of writing. I've read Mary Oliver. I can't remember the name of it. Something with a dance. Does anyone else know it? It's here on the shelf behind me. But she's got some very more gentle, practical ways. If I had more time, I'd think of some more. But the basis for writing for me always came to the process. That first process of discipline, getting down and writing, and then the discipline of doing the editing. And the editing, for me, the art, that is where the art comes in, and I possibly over edit. But that's where I find my joy. And I can't think of any books that teach you that except reading and writing itself, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know if others could list one or two, but those are the ones that spring to mind immediately.
Oh, thank you. Those sound like good ones. The one that you recommended, the War on Art, or I'm getting the name wrong, but the Stephen Pressfield book, The Art of, that one's very...
No, it's the War of Art, I think. Yeah, as I
War
say,
of Art.
it's basic point, and he hammers it home, like every page makes the same point. So it's not so profound as it is insistent. But I think he's saying that war is an insistent one, that you've got to keep fighting resistance and turn yourself into an artist, I suppose, what he's saying.
No, that's a very good book. But thank you. Thanks a lot. I appreciate.
Sure.
I've got some reading to do, and I appreciate your work as well. Thanks a lot, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ed?
Hey, Kirsten. Hi.
Hi, Ed.
I'm Brian. I'm very glad I caught the tail end of your reading. So I confess I only heard about 4 poems. But,
oh no, Ed.
but the thought that went through my mind is often when I've heard you read, I really appreciate the careful, deliberate, considered, meditative, regardless of the subject. It's often that careful deliberation, consideration that I especially appreciate. And your work also includes a lot of nature poems, and I was wondering, or using nature to reflect on human experience as well. And I guess if I have a question, it's just what keeps drawing you back to that world? What is it that you find there? Or is that, do the poems tell that story?
I think, Ed, it was partly my upbringing. My older brother is a zoologist, and a committed zoologist and academic, and being a bit younger than I used to tag along with him a lot. I don't know anything as much as he knows about birds, about animals, about insects, about plants, but I've sort of had that hand-me-down knowledge and the joy of being in spaces. And it's also poets like Edward Thomas and Thomas Hardy that made me see. If you read Proud Songsters and The Darkling Thrush, and they're poems about birds, but they're not really. Proud Songsters is a poem about pride and about people. And it struck me with those writers how much you can use the nature as allegories. And to be honest, when I was first writing in Alice many years ago, there were people who were saying nature poems are irrelevant. And that was the language of the 80s, that you should be doing other stuff. When Jacques talks about what sort of poems have been written and articulated in the 80s, they were not nature poems. Whereas now it's turned, and nature poetry has become quite radical in itself. You know, so it was partly from a family interest, and then also the poets I started to enjoy teaching, I suppose. But I want to, if I may, use your question in the beginning part of it to go back to, you know, when asked what books helped me, it's poets themselves. And I'm sorry I didn't get the name of the guy who asked the last question. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
I can see you, but I can't read your name. But it's John Keats has that poem. I think it's When I Have Fears, and I always go to that if I'm teaching poetry, when I have fears that I may cease to be, because he talks about writing there, and he calls writing or using the pen as the magic hand of chance. And it's in that free writing that I like that chance, that happy accident to emerge. But then I always couple that with Yeats's poem, Adam's Curse, where he talks about a line might, a line might take an hour maybe, but if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has come to naught. It's that sort of tension for me between the magic hand of chance and the stitching and unstitching, what Yeats called the sedentary toil. So some of the poets give these clues as well to I think what can guide us.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Ed. I'm sorry you didn't catch up all of it, but it's nice to see you.
Likewise.
Jacques, you can go ahead.
That Brian, that poet, that First World War poet, you wrote about it. It sounded as if he died in an aeroplane. Was that Edward Thomas?
No, I was reading his book in an aeroplane. He died at the end of Edward Thomas. Yeah, he died at the end of the First World War. In the, like Wilfred Owen, in the dying days of the war.
Yes.
He was killed by an explosion. And we were told when I was younger, it was said that his body was unmarked, but there is a biography of his I read called All Roads Lead to France, I think it's called, which suggests that they only said that so his mother wouldn't be too upset with what did happen to his body. So I don't know what happened to him, but the first story that came out that his body was unmarked by the explosion that killed him. Yeah, but it was Edward Thomas.
Right.
He and Robert Frost were great friends when Frost was in
Yes.
England and
Yes.
had quite a connection. Yeah.
Frost wrote a beautiful poem dedicated to him after he died. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a prose writer, and came to poetry, I think, through Frost. And his body of work isn't very big, but he's very delicate. Some really great poems.
You know that thing he wrote about the owl? Wrote a poem about an owl. I don't know if you know it.
Can't think of it offhand, but
I'll find it. I'll read it later.
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Jacques.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I see, Ryan, you got nice comments in the chat. Cindy, go ahead.
Hi, Brian. Hello, everyone. Oh man, I'm so happy that I was able to join this. Thank you so much, Brian. I haven't had many chances to hear you read, and it was just lovely to be immersed in the work that you're busy with and to hear your writing and to hear it from the poet's mouth and to hear your rhythm and your cadence, where you stress things, where you pause, where you take a breath. I really love it. And in the comment section, I just said that, you know, this for me felt like a midweek respite and a pleasure. And it's really because I just love the sort of emotional precision of your writing. And so you and I both teach creative writing. And I suppose I'm always so interested to hear from those who teach creative writing, because there's still the perennial argument within academia that it can't be taught, you know, whether it can,
Yes,
you know, that nurture versus, you know,
yes.
nature. And so I suppose I have two questions for you. The first question is, I'm so curious to know who are some of the contemporary poets locally or internationally that have stirred you of late? And then the second question, because there are, at least in I think we all have this as teachers, a lot of students want to come and learn poetry or creative writing, short stories, whatever. But there is this idea that, you know, the sort of commercialization as well as the immediacy of people who think that they can just write a poem when the muses hit them and then it's done. And actually, people don't often realize that to craft a poem is a very long journey. So I just want to ask you the second question about the importance of drafting and the skill of editing. What has that journey been like from you? And, you know, I don't know how to put this, you know, what have you learned in that? Because I suppose my question is cushioned in the fact that a lot of young poets are arriving in the classroom thinking that they can just write a poem overnight based on their immediate feelings and not interested in working a poem, massaging a poem, giving a poem space to breathe, and, you know, this return to fine-tuning a poem. So would you just talk about who are the contemporary poets that have really impressed you of late, and your relationship to drafting and the skill of self-editing?
I find, thank you. Both of those are interesting questions, and I used to work in a more academic environment, first at Fort Hare, then I taught briefly at Rhodes in the creative writing MA they have there, but and I've done a bit of work at Nelson Mandela University in that line, but I really am more in community space now with creative writing teaching, if I can call it that. I do more in the community space, and in a way it's a more comfortable space for me, although I really enjoyed my experience at Rhodes, well, at all the universities I've touched it on. Fort Hare was quite amazing for me with that. It's difficult to say contemporary poets because I'm being a bit old. I feel I'm contemporary with a number of people that are considered old. like the one person I've started writing about recently, because I saw him reading once a Statum Kulu Africa, South African poet that I think is much neglected. Really interesting poet, wonderful experiences, and I just wonder why he's not so well read in South Africa, but he's dead now. He was old when I saw him, and he's been dead a while. I would say that I've just gone back to reading him. He also a person whose book I've just put down as Mpolisi in Yeswa, but it's not his poetry book. It's a book of prose that he wrote. He's a very interesting poet. I know him from Port Elizabeth here. But his prose book, it's quite a strangely frightening book in the way he describes his experiences and his difficulties. And so I've been reading him a lot recently. I don't know if you call Derek Walcott contemporary. He's been dead a while as well, but I did a lot of reading of Walcott for a previous book I put together. I really wanted to absorb a lot of his work, and I find him a very intriguing writer. But there are a lot of South African poets that are writing now that are, I mean, Jacques himself, who's there. I love to read Jacques' work. There are a lot of South African poets who are working, and I just wish we had more publications and more better bookshops and availability sometimes. I don't know if that answers adequately that first question. The journey of editing, I think it started with me because I think it made me feel more comfortable to work on something and get to where I wanted to be than reading something that I wasn't happy with, because naturally I tend to be a bit, I'm not satisfied with what I put out very easily, and I don't want to just throw it out there. So I work at it until I feel it's starting to say something like I wanted to say. And it's been a long journey of learning to edit in the way I want to edit with my own poems. One never finishes that journey. I've got into a kind of voice, and I feel I'm a bit bored with that voice, and I want to try something else. So you kind of never settle into it, and I'm trying to find a new way, but it's not easy. But I do find that the journey of editing for me has been the main one, and that is why with the community group I work with, I emphasize editing, but not in a pedantic way, but in a way that is part of the creative act. Editing for me is creative editing. Editing for me is the magic hand of chance, but that you have the magic hand of editing that comes in there and really starts to lift the poem from something that is an initial expression. It might be prosaic, but it lifts it into something that, and that sort of made product for a long time was not necessarily very popular. People were saying, oh, but that's self-indulgent. But at the same time, I do feel, as you say, there's a lot of stuff coming out that is, excuse me, that is not terribly well considered. It can be quite good, but in the, I don't know how to put it, I don't mean the commercial marketplace of poetry. Seamus Heaney described it as the court of poets. When you read poems, you read them to other poets, and they're the ones that judge you. And in the court of poets, you don't want to put out stuff that is not that well considered. And yeah, for me, it has been a long and hard journey, but it's been the essential one for me. It's difficult to teach. It's a very difficult skill to teach editing because it means so many things to people. People, when you say editing, people think it means editing like you edit a thesis or editing like you edit it. But in poetry, it means something else. And for me, it's part of the creativity of poetry. Heck, I don't know if I've answered that well enough.
You've
But it's a
answered it.
very good question.
You've answered it wonderfully. And if I may be so bold, I feel like I'm hogging the space. But just as a last question to what you've just said, since you're trying to pass forward the skill of, the importance of drafting and the skill of being able to self-edit, I just wanted to know, who were your teachers who developed that skill within you?
I was very lucky that when I was at Fort Hare, I went there as a fairly young lecturer and came away 20 years old later as a very old man. But while I was at Fort Hare, I started writing, and I was lucky enough to start writing with two poets. One was Norman Morrissey, who was a master at writing very short pieces of poetry. And the other one was Charlie Lagan, who was he flowed a lot more. And between the two of them, and then a third poet, Basil Sonschlascher, we formed a group called the Echo Poets. It was an informal group, and it remains an informal group. Jacques, Ed, and a few others. So each year we've been writing a book together and just commenting on each other's work. And I think it was the discipline of that. It was a discipline of just having a group of people to share with and talk and encourage, and a gentle space that was still rigorous. An enthusiastic space for me was, I think, very formative. I don't know if I would have got anywhere without a space like that. And it was a space of friends, and it still is with those of us still in the group. It's a space of friends. And therefore it's not hypercritical or one trying to do better than the, and I think that was very important for me. It was important also to say that has its space, my own writing happens in this space, but I was able to use what I learned here to forge ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure, Les. Cindy Swire.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Cindy, for asking that question. Are there any other questions from anyone? If not,
I would like to, it was Troyden who asked the question earlier, wasn't it, about books?
Yes.
Yes.
I would like to think about that and just check my shelves if there's anything else I can recommend. Perhaps just put it on the forum or let. I'll just think about what else is there that is helpful.
Thank you very much. You can maybe put it in the chat if you want, if that's easier.
Sure. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, guys. I think we'll take the 5-minute break now.